Namaste and greetings. I, Priyanshi Arora, a researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav, एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to all of you to the IMPRI hashtag Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered for a special talk on the topic Sexual Violence, Perspectivizing the Role of the State by Professor Pushpesh Kumar. As a part of the series, The State of Gender Equality, hashtag Gender Gaps, organized by IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center. We are beyond honored to have Professor Vibhuti, who will serve as our moderator and chair for the event. She is an influential economist, feminist, and former professor at Advanced Center for Women's Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Welcome, ma'am. With the permission of the chair, I would like to introduce our speaker, Professor Pushpesh Kumar.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please introduce the chair.
Pushpesh Kumar, sir, teaches sociology at University of Hyderabad. He has edited the book Sexuality, Abjection, and Queer Existence in Contemporary India from Routledge and serves on the International Advisory Board of the Community Development Journal, published from OUP, UK, and Ireland. Professor Kumar was a British Academy visiting fellow in the Department of Anthropology, London School of Economics and Political Science, London, in 2009. Sir also received M.N. Srinivas Memorial Prize for Young Sociologist from the Indian Sociological Society in 2007. As a pro-feminist thinker, Pushpesh Sir wrote in the Economic and Political Weekly's special volume on men and feminism in India in 2015. In 2017, Professor Kumar was invited by the South Asia Center, Syracuse University in Syracuse, to share his research on queering Indian sociology. Professor's areas of interest include gender, sexuality, globalization and social changes, caste and kinship, and pedagogical practices in sociology and social sciences. Welcome, sir. Our discussants today are Maitrayee Chaudhuri and Dr. G. Sridevi. Maitrayee ma'am is a professor at Center for Study of Social Systems, School of Social Sciences under Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. G. Sridevi is an associate professor at School of Economics under University of Hyderabad. Welcome to you, ma'am. I would now like to hand over the session to Professor Vibhuti Patel for her opening remarks and invite our speakers for the lecture. Thank you, ma'am, and over to you.
Ma'am, please unmute. Vibhuti, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Priyanshi Arora and Anshula and Dr. Arjun Kumar for organizing discussion on such an important topic. It gives me great pleasure to be in company of Professor Pushpesh Kumar and Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri, renowned academician. I think all those who watch EPG Patshala lectures of her, they know what an erudite and well-informed and scholarly presentations that she makes. And Dr. G. Sridevi. We know that today's topic is very important so far as the new women's rights movement is concerned. It was the rude shock received by imposition of national emergency in India in 1976 that brought this issue to the fore for the first time, like we heard in independent India, how sexual violence was being used against all those 5,000 women activists all over the country. I was in Gujarat, and Gujarat MISA was not used. Maintenance of Internal Security Act was not used. But we heard from our fellow feminists, and especially in the post-emergency period, it became a very important concern for a civil rights movement and the human rights movement. And the feminist articulation started beginning. And there were so many various ways of looking at the question of sexual violence, especially by the representatives of the state, police, paramilitary forces, army, and the testimonies of what was happening in the northeastern states was already being documented. Anand Patwardhan's films, Prisoners of Conscience, it also brought out the question of sexual violence against those who were fighting and quote unquote insurgents who were fighting against the repressive state. After when the national emergency was lifted, the horror stories of custodial violence against under trials and Mary Taylor's book, My 5 Years in Indian Prison, also brought out the barbaric acts of torture in the police custody, and the mainstream newspapers, investigative journalists, they all started bringing out various stories, and it was the most systematic work which was done by Sri Shakti Sangatna in Hyderabad, where a young woman was gang raped by police, and the Muqtadar commission was appointed specially to discuss the case. And it was in 1980 when Justice Chandrachud gave a very, very misogynist judgment in case of Mathura, an Adivasi girl who was raped by two policemen in the police custody in front of all villagers. And the case went on in the Session Court, High Court, and Supreme Court, and they did not give justice. And the stereotypical ideology of victim blaming and brutalization and of Adivasi, Dalit, and all those who were very active in the social movements in the late 70s, they were repeatedly coming up in a very, very negative way. And it is in this context that the 4 professors of Delhi University wrote an open letter, which resulted in a nationwide anti-rape movement, and the question of custodial rape, rape by the police, those who are holding and using sexual violence against although just to silence the community, silence the women who were protesting. I think that came to the fore. It came center stage. We also saw that in innumerable reports of caste riots and communal riots, also we have seen that how the weapon of sexual violence is used by the repressive forces of the state to silence the community, especially those who are from the marginalized section. We have experienced that in the tribal areas, we have experienced that against the Dalit communities, we have experienced that at the time of communal riots. So sexual violence is a weapon to demoralize the communities and especially women, and also not only brutalize them, but also stigmatize them. I think is very, very important reality that emerged not only in India, but all over the world, because when the UN declared International Women's year in 1975, there was hardly any talk on violence. It was the pressure of the international women's movement, especially women from the developing countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, that the question of sexual assault by the state machinery. We had experience of Chile, we had experience in Mexico, and so many where there were dictatorial regimes. The state machinery had been extremely oppressive, and sexual assault on the transgender persons, that is also come up with when the LGBT movement started articulating their concerns and speaking about this thing. The attitude of the state, which is it has a dual face. When it comes to middle class, urban, educated, English-speaking women, they treat them very differently. But when it comes to the working class, Dalit minorities, even sexual minorities and religious minorities, tribal women, the state takes extremely brutal measures against them, and sexual violence becomes a very, very effective and very controlling mechanism to have a control over sexuality, fertility, and labor of women. And that is, it has always been used as a weapon to keep the communities in the continuous state of terrorization, humiliation, degradation, and subjugation. So it is in this context that today's topic is extremely important, and our friend Professor Pushpesh Kumar has done a long standing record here of doing a research and working with the underserved and marginalized communities, and especially taking up the question of stigma, violence, brutalization, marginalization, and silencing of those who have been victimized by not only by the structures of patriarchy and system, but also those who are supposed to be the defenders, because that's a famous slogan in women's movement, Rakshak ban gaye bhakshak. So this is the way state has been operating. And I think today's his presentation is going to be very, very educative and enlightening to all of us. Our discussants, both of them are also very important so far as the feminist articulation of the, and also human rights articulation of the problem is concerned. Over to Professor Pushpesh Kumar.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Patel, for setting the tone for this presentation. And I'm really finding myself in a very tight corner to speak in front of you, Professor Maitrayee, Chaudhuri, Dr. Sridevi, and many others, maybe there in the audience. But whatever I have learned during my engagement with teaching and researching feminism and queer issues, I will try to put forward here for deliberations. So what I focus here is basically on perspectivizing the role of state with regard to sexual violence. And my intention is not here to engage in any kind of definitional aspect of sexual violence. I shall rather deal with certain broader frameworks and nuances through which one can engage with the question at hand. And I draw upon my encounters with feminist literature on the subject through my teaching and research engagements, and illustrate through certain concrete stances to substantiate these claims. I will be talking about the practices of state. The state, which includes police, judiciary, bureaucracy, legislative, etc., operate with certain understanding about women and gender transgressive persons and groups, which shows the possibilities and limits of these institutions in addressing and dealing with sexual violence and in delivering justice to women and other subordinate genders. In many instances, the violence is built into the very imagination and and operates in the very imagination and operates and operation of different organs and apparatuses of state. The first claim which I'm making, and I cannot exhaust every tropes in this context, but I'm pointing towards certain tendencies of the state through which state looks at the sexual violence, and then in this imagination of the state, how sexual violence is also built into and inherent. So the first claim I'm making is that state operates with certain essentialist premise, creating trap for women. The state's legal apparatuses sometimes place an overemphasis on corporeality and vulnerability of women and imagines them as victims and inherently rapeable. Inevitability of rape becomes a dominant cultural script, inscribing passive and non-combative model of femininity and physically aggressive masculinity, setting up women to live with both fear and practices of rape. And there is hardly a self-reflection coming from the state on its own modus operandi, if not critique and vigorously pursued and prescribed through feminist mobilization. This perpetuates both patriarchal protectionism and absolves the state from destabilizing gender stereotypes through, for example, paying attention towards investments in women's self-defense and sports. I mean, opening such possibilities for those who might aspire to the same and are willing to take risks in questioning patriarchy or subverting patriarchy. I wish to bring in here still Silpa case invocation of women's loitering in public spaces during the night, or rather claiming the night in large numbers towards a reconfiguration of public space as experience of freedom and equality during the night hours, destabilizing street as exclusive masculine spaces, turning violent for many women who dares to show up in these masculinist spaces. And the state never engages with such question because of the idea of inherent rapability and vulnerability as cultural scripts not only hinders a shift in street culture, but it also translates into processes of legal justice, subjecting women to violence and control in the garb of protecting. So I quote here Pratiksha Bakshi. She demonstrates how the lower judiciary's comprehension of choice marriages or improper alliance marriages forced through love and on their own, independent of kin and family, is loaded with such essentialist ideas of women's vulnerability and the notion that women do not know their minds and are easily manipulated, implying that the man with whom she eloped or got married is a manipulator and the woman is an innocent victim. Considering the plurality of law and multiple ways through which law operates, she writes that the narratives of love are entangled in procedural law. Sovereignty is defined in relation to love, and love labors in the corridors of law. To Baxi, the state law is used as a resource to recover an adult runaway daughter with the help of police and the lower judiciary, which acts in complicity with family to rescue adult women from improper alliances. In Indian law, a woman attains the right to choose a partner in marriage at the age of 18 when she is recognized as major. Baxi demonstrates how adult heterosexual women who chooses to get married in contravention to the wishes of their family are brought under the fold of criminal and constitutional law. A criminal complaint against the partner of the daughter, charging him with statutory rape, abduction, and kidnapping are deployed by natal family in consultation with lawyers and police, then follow on efficient police procedure. The police hunt the couples down, who are then brought to the police station for questioning. If the woman states that she was not abducted, she may face custodial violence, which is normalized in police remand. If she is able to withstand the pressure and violence to break off her relationship, she may be jailed on criminal complaint brought against her, usually on the grounds of having stolen some valuables from her parents' home before she eloped. She cites the case of Kalyani Chaudhuri, who was detained in protective home for women following the dispute between her father and her husband, becoming a battle of custody between the two parties. So Kalyani herself is not constituting as a party whose consent is secured or whose interest can be represented to the court except through the father or the husband. She was sent to Nari Niketan following an order by judicial magistrate where her mobility was curbed. It is illegal to detain a woman in protective home when she does not attract the provision of suppression of immoral traffic in Women and Girls Act. Baxi says how women caught in circles of trafficking are conflated with women who refuse to be exchanged in matrimonial trafficking. Such illegal detention in protection homes is anchored in discourses of recovery of women from improper alliances. A woman's illegal detention is premised on the assumption that the women are easily manipulated and do not know their minds, and even if the courts may not hand over the daughters to the father, the court acts as parens patriae, the monarch or any authority as legal protector of citizens unable to protect themselves. Of these rather infantilized women in judicial imagination. Baxi writes the sovereign power over an adult daughter is folded into the state law, thereby localizing the state law. So the logic of protectionism premised on a different nature of women as vulnerable and easily manipulated, in this case by lower judiciary, can do more harm to women than help. The state operates on sexist assumption that women's interests are best understood by court and judiciary as easily manipulated or not fully rational to take decisions. One can also see this continuity in statist imagination while dealing with women who sell their womb, the surrogate mothers. They are projected as vulnerable and exploited, with the state trying to protect them from market and commercial exploitation. The voice and agency of these women are completely muted in a statist discourse, all in the name of protecting women from vulnerabilities. The binary imagination of women's vulnerability and rapability combined with male aggression places women into certain domains of respectability, innocence, corporeality, and state plays out these in different contexts. Those women who transgress this model are held responsible for inviting violence, and hence the state and popular narratives overlap and interact in placing the blame on women for sexual violence. The incarceration of activist women in contemporary India who might be risk takers and transgressing the vulnerability model can be placed and understood against this backdrop. And caste and class, of course, mediate access to patriarchal respectability, which can be seen in the recent displacement from the demolition of settlements in Khori village near Faridabad by the Supreme Court's order. The disturbing televisuals of helplessness and vulnerability of women and children with their houses bulldozed overnight without any promises to rehabilitative measures did not occur to the apex court. In this case, these women are not vulnerable because they belong to certain caste, certain class also. These rather not so respectable women can be left unprotected and uncared by the same state. So in the case of choice marriages and improper alliances, the lower courts are localized, becoming saviors of innocent women. The separation between church and state, a Western hallmark of modernizing societies, become opaque and blurred where state and popular mingle and reinforce each other. My second claim is that state is heteropatriarchal, heterosexist, and phallocentric. So in this, I try to illustrate through the ways of engaging with gender and sexual non-conforming person and communities, and contrasting that heterosexualization of public culture with beauty queens and cricket star masculinity in post-liberalized India. Suparna Bhaskaran describes the continent of Indian economy opening up to transnational capital in early 1990s with astounding beauty pageants and intensified spectacularization of cricket star. I quote here Arjun Appadurai. And besides entanglements of hegemonic cricket star masculinity and cultural ambassador femininity, consider a combination of brain and beauty into networks of market capital and corporate world, their celebration as icons and ideals of masculinity and femininity reinforce heterosexism in public and national cultures. Both the beauty queens and cricket stars are authentically Indian despite their identity to pass as global transnational citizens with their remarkable entrepreneurial instincts and individualism. Their career success and their gendered bodies, perfected through beauty products, bodybuilding, and workout regimens, constitute the model for an ideal man and woman. The differences lie in the fact that beauty queens are simultaneously embodiments of social service and maternal values, while male cricket stars' bodies are not articulated through social service and welfare. Their sportsman masculinity does not need these markers reserved for femininity. As both the beauty queens and cricket star bring pride to the nation, they represent the ideal model of classed masculinity and femininity in the symbolic and material reinstitution of heterosexuality within the market and state discourses, whereas the nation situates non-heterosexual subjects and those abjected heterosexual like sex workers who fail the ideal moral gendered scripts of the nation. It appears that hegemonic heterosexualization of 1990s through beauty pageants and cricket stars fit well with nationalist sexual politics as well as the transnational capital expansion. However, it is important to ask what compelled the nation to also engage with abjected sexualities, the homosexuals, politicized as sexual minorities in the context of HIV/AIDS pandemic, raising its ugly head and emerging concerns of hegemonic humanitarian West towards the third world. The third world were imagined as moral and material geographies, housing and spreading diseases in a world becoming one through deregulation and trade liberalization, lifting restriction on movements of capital, goods, and people. The World Bank facilitated formation of National AIDS Organization. Under the shade of international development and health in privatizing the identity behavior categorization that posed a threat to moral and sexual health of the nation as real and potential carriers of HIV/AIDS included commercial sex workers, drug users, intravenous drug users, and homosexuals, including the newly imported category of men who have sex with men. So both heterosexualization and politicization of non-heterosexual subjects have certain transnational linkages, but the state engages with the heterosexuals, that is the class masculinity and femininity, the cricket and beauty queens with pride, while concerns with the abjected sexuality under international pressures. It took almost 2 decades for the apex court in India to bring the erotically marginalized under the definition of legality After the painful struggle of LGBTQI collectives against the draconian law of Section 377 of Indian Penal Code, this entry and visibility of non-heterosexual subjects operate within a very different registers of disease and threat, while class heterosexuality via beauty pageant and sports were easily accepted and spectacularized at extravaganza through TV channels and corporate market sponsorship and consumer advertisements. Even after the recent legality gained by homoerotically inclined subjects, LGBTQI, they are not offered any. They have not offered any pride to the nation like beauty queens and stars and cricket stars. This, despite assimilation of certain queer subjects as consumer citizens in corporatized urban spaces, and I have written about it. Now we look at a little bit about transgender movement, and the transgender communities have been fighting against the heterosexism and transphobia of the state since 2014 after the Supreme Court Nalsa's judgment extending citizenship rights to the transgender communities. Here one can see the contradictory practices of state. The Supreme Court of India extended citizenship rights and substantive rights to transgender communities, but the government has been reluctant to translate this substantive right, such as availability and access to gender-neutral washrooms, affirmative action in education and employment, though a state has granted this to economically backward upper castes, right? But it has not extended its affirmative action to trans communities who are demanding for it. Trans-friendly health infrastructure, free sex reassignment surgery, which are all ensured in the Supreme Court judgment. Post 2014, there has not even been a survey in sensible framework to know what is the numerical strength of communities to bring them into welfare fold. The pandemic has brought further precarity and miseries to the community. The community has been fighting since 2014 and questioning and challenging the distortions of SC verdict. The government is constantly truncating the proposed bills and acts to erase the substantive elements of justice. Whereas Supreme Court verdict talked about self-determination of gender, the government insisted on a screening committee to prove one's claim to being trans. Whereas the community talked about alternative family and kinship, the state came up with draconian rehabilitation model. After much struggle, the transgender communities have achieved some rights. There is hardly any campaign and institutional mechanism in place to educate the mainstream about dignity of the community, transgender community as citizens, and channelization of adequate resources to ensure socioeconomic entitlements. I wish to quote here Paul O'Connell, who talks about death of socioeconomic rights under neoliberal state, implying a de facto harmonization of constitutional protection of rights with privatization and drastic cut on welfare funds. Azura and Gray suggest that recognition does not necessarily translate into justice and empowerment for marginalized groups and communities. Recently, Ananya, a transgender woman from Kochi, committed suicide as she could not cope up with her very complicated sex reassignment surgery. The private hospital where the surgery was conducted was unresponsive to her complaints. She faced humiliation when she demanded resurgery and harassment when she requested a treatment summary. The Supreme Court asked the government to be accountable and ensure safe sex reassignment surgery. More than 7 years have passed and the state is yet to have a concrete policy for facilitating basic requirements of community. There was another report saying that transgender persons have they were queuing up for to be jabbed, but they do not find any washroom to relieve themselves in their longer wait. One trans woman in Ranchi recently committed suicide as she did not have anything to eat without begging. Now I turn to a kind of phallocentrism because of the paucity of time. You know, how the state is using a language. People who are getting vaccinated, the state is saying Bahubali. So they all are Bahubali, you know, in the state discourse. There has been feminist and Dalit critics of the film Bahubali, but the people who man the governance do not wish to engage with critical reflection, which will feed into democratization of public culture. What is crucial from an erotic and sexual justice perspective is how a state which regulates sexuality is also unwilling to counter misogyny and sexual violence legitimized through popular and public culture, or it remains complicit in the misogyny either through indifference or endorsement. I reflect on the misogynistic film Kabir Singh and its phenomenal success in the box office and the ethics of state which is constitutionally committed to gender justice. Does the state which is committed to gender justice allow for making of such films just because they have a popular demand? When the director, filmmaker Sandeep Reddy Vanga remarks in justification of the misogyny in the film, if you can't slap, if you can't touch your woman whenever you want, if you can't kiss, I don't see emotion there. What is the responsibility of the state, and who is called upon to contest and critique the unfair and inegalitarian remarks? Of course, the voices of dissent and feminist and women's group through their Twitter handle and Facebook posts and essays in magazines and newspapers stick their neck out. But who is to check the popular demand for sexism, misogyny, and scopophilia of the majority and ensure that minority voices of dissent, feminist and pro-women get a fair hearing? This is something akin to upholding constitutional morality against public morality, which in Ambedkar's vision is not a natural statement but needs to be cultivated. Ambedkar was mindful of the fact that in the absence of constitutional morality, the operation of constitution, no matter how carefully written, tend to become arbitrary, erratic, and capricious. When a state fails to address misogyny in popular culture, here a film, do the filmmakers, director, and state receive a substantial share in what Revin Connell calls patriarchal dividend? Is the silence of state is due to tax money, as the director and protagonist earn massive profits and high emolument, and of course, prestige and power? It seems pertinent to quote Lara Datta, the actor, entrepreneur, and the winner of Miss Universe 2000 pageant about the misogyny of Bollywood. She said, I worked within what has been a misogynistic industry, and even now, the film industry remains hetero-driven and male-dominated. As women, you learn how to navigate that in your own way. The deluge of allegations and sexual harassment during Me Too movement in Bollywood, Tollywood, Mollywood, and Tamil cinema reinforce and even reveal much more about the entrenchment of patriarchy and misogyny in these settings. And what is the responsibility of the state? And I pose a question here. My third claim is that state appropriates feminism while accommodating patriarchy. One can see feminist appropriation in a status discourse such as Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, and many other programmatic rhetoric of the state. Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri's NRSC has written on the market's selective appropriation of feminism in corporate and advertisements, which is also called femvertism. But it simultaneously accommodates patriarchal and reinforces rather patriarchal interest. And I come here to Nirbhaya case. So everybody knows that on December 16, Jyoti Singh, who was also given the name Nirbhaya by the press, a 23-year-old physiotherapy student, was brutally gang raped by 6 men in a bus in South Delhi. The severity of sexual assault and inadequate response of Indian government to crime provoked a nationwide protest and demand for legal reform. While other rapes have prompted public outcry, this particular inspired and elevated interest not only in India but around the world. Protesters urged rapid legislative reforms as tribute and insurance that no such event would happen again in India. Men participated visibly in large numbers, that is also being said. Notwithstanding the Dalit feminist critique around the rape protest, that nation does not show similar solidarity when non-Savarna Dalit woman is raped. Abelina Sakil's essay pithy outlines the potential of this nationwide protest around the Nirbhaya rape case in re-scripting and destabilizing the popular narrative around gender. She demonstrates the dubious role of state in reinstituting patriarchy by diluting the content of Justice Verma Committee report. It needs to be highlighted here that the government was compelled to institute Justice Verma Committee under pressure from public protest around the Delhi rape case. But the report, which was profound in terms of incorporating a transformative feminist agenda, was toned down by the government, converting it into an ordinance. It is so the Justice Verma Committee, instituted by the government in response to public, received 80,000 submissions from the concerned people wanting to change in rape laws to ensure women's justice. This was unprecedented in history of democratization from a gender perspective. The JBC report held state responsible and accountable for conditions of women, their right to life, security and bodily integrity, democratic and civil rights, equality and non-discrimination, right to secure spaces, special provision for elderly and disabled women, and protection of women in distress. The committee also discussed patriarchal attitude of police, suggesting a thorough police reform where any oversight or apathy would invite action under the law. The committee redefined rape from viewpoint of women's experience, which is premised on their full bodily autonomy and integrity, taking within its purview the instances of marital rape. Consent was also redefined as absence of unequivocal voluntary agreement, so that passivity under shock or trauma was not constructed as consent. The committee also held that offenses must become graver if committed by police servants and prescribed that extra power of Armed Forces Special Power Act, APSPA, should be amended and the Kha Panchayat need to be cut, proposing a constitutional body similar to Controller and Auditor General for a gender audit of the entire system. The government's response in terms of Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance 2013, however, failed to incorporate these transformative contents of JVC. It dropped marital rape, failed to address prescribed amendment to APSPA, and remained silent on the rehabilitation of victim survivors of rape. The language of outraging, similarly, the substantive aspects of transgender right is erased by the state. Similarly, here you can see that it is toned down by the state. The language of outraging the modesty was reinstated. The lack of willingness of state in owning responsibility and accountability and to accept some drastic amendments in law to create public spaces safer reflect that state remains patriarchal and masculinist despite its rhetoric of women's empowerment and gender justice. It is pertinent to note here that Nirvaya Fund created after the protest around Delhi gang rape to ensure public safety for women has been highly underutilized, reflecting again the unwillingness of state to ensure gender justice. Now, the fourth claim which I'm making, I don't know how much time do I have. I can't.
5 to 7 minutes. Yeah.
5 to 7 minutes. So I have so much of things, but I will just end up with this. The state also chooses not to engage with feminism. So feminism is played out as Western and un-Indian in popular and political discourses. I remember Sushma Swaraj, who passed away, who said in 1996, I was under a National Commission for Women's Project. I was trying to interview her, and she was saying, I believe in Nari Shakti and not in Nari Mukti. So also our conversation with Meera Kumar, the Congress politician, who vaguely told that, yes, feminism is Western. We have to seek empowerment within Indian context, and we have models available in India. So Western and un-Indian then becomes an alibi or cover up for turning away from serious concern raised by feminists. I turn now to Me Too movement and the kind of concerns raised therein. But what I wish to emphasize here is that the government failed to engage with the movement altogether, except removing a very high-profile minister. This amount to trivialization and dismissal, and was even reduced to a butt of joke, and the issue was left to women to deal themselves. One can see the female politicians across party lines barely coming in support of Me Too movement. This can be contrasted to the vulnerability and manipulated stance of women's subjecthood needing protection. So these women are Western, un-Indian, and they may not need protection. These women may be imagined as Indian, un-Indian, independent, Western, and hence their credentials are doubted as innocently vulnerable and easily manipulated. The qualifiers for protectionism. The judiciary only responds when the defamation cases were filed in the court by men accused of harassment. So we have instances of many women, and I will not probably go into the details. And in Hyderabad also, we have Sridevi, who walked to Telugu film chambers of commerce, who stripped across and sat cross-legged in full public glare to protest against Ellie's sexual harassment in Tollywood before the police whisked her away for creating a public nuisance. Sexual harassment and exploitation, decorously called uh, casting couch, are an open secret. I quote here some of the authors from Anveshi and other places. But the Telugu film industry has refused to acknowledge this, let alone address it. Telugu film industry's corporate structure of production is largely under the control of a few families. Most male actors hail from families that own these production houses, but women are discouraged. So women of these Telugu families, film stars families and those who own the film industry. The men are allowed to be heroes, but women are not allowed to be heroines. So they import heroines from outside, from Kerala, from North India, from other places. So most male actors hail from families that own these production houses, but women are discouraged. Like other industries, unquestioned royalties, unequal pay structure, sexual privilege, rampant discrimination, and lack of transparency prevail. The patriarchal power can exert so much influence that the Movie Artists Association banned Sridevi, acting like a Kha Panchayat and sounding like a feudal lord. This association of Film Artists Association accused her of being immodest, of defiling its premises. So she's not an innocent woman to be protected, because she stripped herself in front of publicly. So banned its members from working with her and hauntingly declared that it will not yield to such blackmail. The junior and character artists began to own up Reddy as symbolizing their struggle for survival and dignity, at great risk to their livelihoods. So now the character actors, who are paid very low, they also came up and started telling the narratives of their sexual harassment in public, and they started owning Reddy as symbolizing their struggle for survival and dignity at great risk, and all of them lost their livelihood. So at great risk of their livelihood, these women not only called upon women's groups to support them, but also went ahead to speak about the sexual and economic exploitation that they have suffered. They have been laying out their lives in open, inviting viewers to stand in their place and see the industry from their perspective. What was demanded by women's group is a high-level inquiry by constituting a committee. They went to Chief Minister and they asked that you should constitute a high-level inquiry, constituting of female bureaucrats, women activists, external members from feminist activists, but the state shied away from instituting such a high-level committee. A mere institution of internal complaint committee was considered as an eyewash and trivializing the issues, and all Bollywood, Tollywood, Mollywood, and everything is full of sexism, exploitations, discrimination, and the state has never thought of. They don't have even internal complaint committee. This is the first time in regional cinema you will see that internal complaint committee has come up. And then in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, you will see that Women in Cinema Collective, WCC, has come up to address this issue now. Now, I'll end up with neoliberalism. The other claim I'm making is neoliberalism, state and securitization, and how they look at sexual violence. This is from America and not the Indian story, but you may find a resonance between American story and Indian story. Christine Bromiller from American context reveals how state-based action are become more removed from and inconsistent with the initial goals of feminist movement. By the late 1970s, the tenets of neoliberalism began to influence American public policy at home and abroad, including free market policies, pro-corporatism, privatization, and in particular, the transfer of public services to private organizations. The call for state responsibility for preventing and treating victims was in direct contrast to the new ethics of personal responsibility that was the cornerstone of neoliberal agenda. This contradiction was resolved, but at the cost of incorporation of feminist anti-violence movement into apparatus of regulatory state. The outgrowth of neoliberalism has been the expansion of regulatory functions of the state. The state and its actors have, as part of regulatory apparatus, crisis centers and shelters, now small segments. So crisis centers and shelters were funded by states, heavily funded by states, and the women have autonomy to organize and manage it. If you look at 1960s in America, for example, and these women held responsibility and all kinds of, instilled feminist ideas within this institution, and that became a very small segment in the US. Yeah, and crime control emerges as the most important agenda for state, resulting in massive incarceration of certain minority and ethnic groups. The severe punishment for crime against women feed into reactionary forces. Now we see also in India the demand for death penalty rather than demand for death penalty rather than making streets safer for women through more women-friendly patrolling and crisis intervention centers is gaining more legitimacy. So you should not make investment to make public spaces safer for women, but you focus on to control the crime by picking up certain people from certain class, ethnic group, minority, and incarcerate them and try to claim that they are protecting women and defending women. During the rape of a veterinary woman in Hyderabad, the police was issuing advisory to women to remain confined to home after certain hours in the evening. Through these developments, the progressive ideals of feminist campaign focusing on improving women's lives and well-being defer to crime control prerogatives. The mass media, prosecutors, therapists, and law enforcement officials who have a stake in constructing sexual violence as a social problem. This narrative reinforces a dominant narrative about dangerous elements in society. This might help in exonerating the privileged men who are exposed through Me Too campaign on social media. So state is disbelieving that these men can also be predators and violators of, or sexual offenders, right? So it relegates to, or it gets incorporated within the body of certain ethnic and minority community, and patrolling and crime control becomes the main agenda of the state in neoliberal times, and less investment into feminist agendas. And you can also see the Women's Studies Center, how they are now drying up, not generously funded. It was never generously funded, but it was better funded, of course. So many people are becoming unemployed, they have no salaries, they're in hope, expectations, vulnerability, precarity, and everything, and we can place it there. So the most recent additions to sex crime courts in America are Megan laws meant for sex offenders registry for law enforcement. Rose Corrigan has argued that these statutes are not only reinforce beliefs that strangers inherently always pose the greatest threat to communities, but ultimately have the effect of fueling racially focused crime control efforts rather than actually improving women's safety. By increasing emphasis on crimes, victims, and offenders who fit more easily with the stereotypes about rape held by the criminal justice gatekeepers. We can see this. I was in Maharashtra in 2008 when this was happening. We can see Raj Thakre's call to eliminate UP Bhaiyas and Bihari immigrants in 2008, probably. And if you look at the televisuals of those time, Thakre was shown as iconic Krishna, who is descended suddenly with force and vigor to free Maharashtra, or Maharashtrian Asmita, the honor of Maharashtra, from these migrants. And I think I will stop here. I had more stories, but I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Pushpesh Kumar. You are an excellent storyteller. And with your meticulously researched and detailed exposition of the problem, I think what emerges the trend that it is not, misogyny is everywhere, whether it's the judiciary, legislators, even in the media, also community leaders like a CAP, who politicians call them social workers, police, army, and all of them are into the discourse on crime against women. But at the same time, we know that it was a Indian Parliament, 100%, where the politicians of all hues, they agreed not to control the army by repealing APSA, which gives a special power to the army, and we know what all they have done, whether it was in Indian peacekeeping forces work in Sri Lanka, what happened, mass rape of Tamil women, and in Northeast, in Kashmir, there are so many investigation reports with complete detail, and still the state is not ready to accept. And I don't say that only one political party. All at that time we had Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, who said that if we will not take any action against Indian army, it will demoralize them. I myself had signed the letter, and we received letter from Prime Minister's office. Another thing, another very important issue is that of a marital rape. Even about that, the popular perception as well as the perception of this thing. And I think we have seen even in Lok Adalat, where the people's organization, community organization would ask the survivor to marry the rapist. Okay, that has happened even among the local left groups, to the kind of recent judgments we have received in Madhya Pradesh High Court or in Chennai High Court, where they were asked, even the married rapist was asked to, he was asked whether he would marry the survivor, who was underage, no, and she was pregnant. So I think that we have a long way to go, but the only ray of hope is a constant questioning by the women's movement, by the LGBT movement, by the social movements, people's movement, and the younger generation, the way they are now challenging this kind of very oppressive way of keeping the people who are in weak. I won't say it's only women, it's the women, children, sexual minorities, all of them are at the receiving end of this kind of misogyny. Now I request Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri to give her response.
So thank you so much. Thank you for IMPRI for organizing this. And I'm so glad that Professor Vibhuti Patel is here and she's sort of laid the contours, so to say. Pushpesh, I think you are absolutely marvelous, that you addressed the dynamics of the state bottom up, so to say. So, that what were the impact, how it operated in very different ways. So to begin with, if I can sort of very quickly highlight the way you talked about, you began with the tendency of the state, the idea that women are inherently rapeable. They can be inherently raped. And I understand where it's coming from, the assumption that you would need patriarchal protectionism of the good women, the vulnerable women. And then you go on further to say, but you distinguish it from those women who are not so good and who would therefore be people who would be questioning and threatening the order of society, the order of the state. You then contrast this patriarchal protectionism to what happens with the way the beauty pageant Indian women who are hailed by the state. I remember at that point of time, I think when Shushmita Sen and Aishwarya Rai came back, they were taken on, the India Gate path in the car of the first president of India, saying they're iconic winners and achievers of the state. You very interestingly compare it with the way the cricketer is posited, who's also an icon of the state, but does not have to be necessarily identified with the maternal qualities which this iconic beauty pageant woman would be, Now here, what is interesting, if you notice, whether it's the tendency of the state and the distinction that is being made between two different kinds of women, and in the second question about the beauty pageant and the cricketer, if we have to sort of conceptualize, what we have is, what is the relationship of the state to other social institutions in society: family, marriage, kinship, caste, community, politics, education, law, of course, you've talked about. And I think we have to look at that, not see the state as a body, which is sort of like a box, and which has certain fixed ingredients in it. So if it is a patriarchal state, or, if it is an upper caste state, or in the West, if it is a white state, but rather see the possibilities of the state. in the sense what, Professor Patel was saying, the constant interrogation of the state. Because if you do not have that constant interrogation of that state, then there are no possibilities at all. It's a closed story. So the fact that today every one of us, Professor Patel would be familiar, say, for when my generation started our education and we came to the university, there was no women's studies. There was no feminist course. There was nothing. Now, it was only the persistence of the movement which forced open the state. So whether you began the women, however precarious, however fragile, because that other contestation was always there, right? That it is not a good idea. But you did have a possibility that you have now generations of young women who speak a very different language from many of us at that age, who didn't even have the language or the ability to articulate maybe even questions which we experience, but had neither language nor the legitimacy to be heard at that point of time. So I feel it's very important not to see the state as something which is a given. But since you mentioned, the whole question of public morality and constitutional morality, and you brought in the question of Dr. Ambedkar too, but see the state as committed and enshrined. So therefore, particularly in our context today, where you have both neoliberalism and majoritarianism, to bring in the kind of things which emerged in the Constitution. Why do people speak so much about the Constitution today? Because the Constitution embodies the struggles of different sections, whether at that point of time, democratic sections, feminist sections, civil liberties sections, that may not, so to see the state as something which is only either being dual-faced or using different, would be, I feel, it is correct. Empirically, yes, as you have so well demonstrated, that's how it is. But you have to also see what the state is and how it changes. The point you mentioned about the American context, but very much here. If you recall, even about 2 decades before, there was a suggestion to rename the Women's Studies Center the Women and Family Studies Center. So that tendency will always be there. Okay, and therefore you will have to invoke other possibilities which are there in your realm. So when you have, human rights, why do you still go to a Supreme Court, which we know operates very differently and may even suggest getting married to the rapist? But there are possibilities, and these possibilities have to be invoked, particularly in our contemporary times, because otherwise, otherwise we sort of leave the state totally, which cannot happen, because if that happens, and we see it increasingly, then we see just the violence of the state. We don't even see the adjustive or adaptive possibilities of the state. The state then literally becomes the enemy of the people, which is also a possibility if pushed to a corner. So it is, I think, very much in our realm as citizens, of people who are committed to justice, social justice, democratic values, feminism, to retrieve within the state those possibilities which we have, and struggle for it. It's not going to be easy. We know that. Since, earlier we only talked about incarceration in our maybe academic circles, we know it's real. But here also, again, I think that hope is there. So to go back to your point, the tendency of the state being inherently rapeable, I would hesitate to say inherently rapeable. I would rather say that we have to see the relationship between the state and society, a point that both Professor Patel and you have mentioned, Pushpesh, in your thing. The idea that the judges, the lower court officials, the bureaucracy, the police, are all products of the society in which we live in. They are products of the families in which we live in, of the schools and colleges in which we go, which are deeply misogynistic, deeply patriarchal, And that problem is not just that they harbor those ideas, but they harbor those ideas as good ideas. So it is, as sociologists, I think we haven't adequately negotiated with the power of common sense. That this is virtue. And as teachers, very often we haven't explored that possibility, of how. And I often now use, because you talked about the Westernness of feminism and the authentic Indian woman, etc. But if you look at somebody like Rokia's Sultana's Dream, where you have this conversation where, you have the protagonist saying that why are the men in parda? And she says that if a wild animal walks into your town, would you imprison the wild animal or would you imprison the people? The streets are dangerous. Okay. Now, here is a way by which we probably often don't use literature, don't use our own sources to capture, very often the language which we speak in alienates people, and disconnects what people already feel disconnected. Sometimes very self-consciously they use that disconnect. Sometimes it's real, that they're not able to quite relate it. So first, tendency of the state. Second, your comparison of Indian women and cricketer. And then you say about, very beautifully, you evoke the language. And I think that becomes very, very important. Language and communication. We are living in times where we have seen the power of language and communication. You know that somebody is talking nonsense and people are believing that nonsense, And this role of media cannot be, ignored. When you say the term Bahubali, that you're vaccinated, now you're a Bahubali, okay? Now there is, or for example, everybody is a warrior, examination warrior, everybody, the image of the battlefield, the image of the most nationalist is the army, not the peasant or the farmer. Okay. Now here you have another point, the historicization of the state. Yes, most states, as Professor Patel just mentioned, of the earlier regime, unwilling to, change the law. But the fact is that there are tendencies which do redefine the state. So you would have a political party which is compromised, unwilling, and you would have another political party which is committed to patriarchy. There is a very fine distinction, but an important distinction, where, because then if that distinction is not made, then you have no possibility. When people actually say it's all right, and you gave the image of the woman in Hyderabad who was raped and the police shot the rapist. Okay, and in every middle class drawing room, people applauded. Even in the case of the Jyoti Singh, if you remember, everybody came on television and said, hang the rapist, yes. And it was only the feminists who came up and said, don't overdo this. There has to be justice. There has to be procedural laws. So actually the feminist theorization of the state is very complex. So when people say, look, you're accusing the state and then you're demanding of the state, precisely that is the relationship of the state and the citizen. You demand, you question, you critique. But if you have a state, which you mentioned at the tail end about a new liberal state, and you also bring in the American context, the majoritarian aspect, then the state has withdrawn from all its social welfare commitments. So here the state is just brutal repression. Social welfare is your entrepreneurial self, your pakora, your independent, whatever has to be done. And the state is there just to put all the challenges behind bars, imprison, incarcerate, punish, teach them a lesson. Now, what has happened today is that we had good laws very often. The feminist movement won many victories. What we lacked as educationists, perhaps, we did not question this ideology enough. We questioned it, we say it's patriarchal, fine. But what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is not an explanation. And I think for many of us, I of course retire now, but Pushpesh and your generation and younger people have to explain how it is actually implicated in our common sense as we grow up, of who's good, who's bad. The good girl, bad girl was always there. Now it's properly intersectional. The good girl has to be from a particular caste or community, and the bad girl has to come from some other caste or community. So you have actually othering of both gender and othering of communities, So I think this has to be looked at. And that people actually believe, the fact that judges actually tell the girl that would you like to marry the rapist, through how deep rooted and how inadequate our educational system has been in our effort to make education easy and simple. Many of my generation, we knew that we had to read lots of books, we had to read lots of novels, we had to read poetry. Okay, now in schools you have two extracted texts, whichever language the school may be in. We, of course, private universities are opening liberal education, but there is no liberal education in our schools, where people may, we were just discussing before the talk about Tagore's writings, or so many of our writings, they're deeply gender socially conscious. And, but we don't use those resources at all, We do not give examples from our everyday life of how much we're deeply socialized into it, We don't explore the questioning mind. And the fact that now, of course, everything is, it's going to be worse because everything is now, what is that thing called, multiple questions, limited marks. It is a killing. It's a killing of the critical mind, So I think we must focus on one, the relationship of the state and society, the reproduction of the ideas within the family, the most private space, from which the judge goes and the policeman goes and the teacher goes and the bureaucrat goes and the policeman goes, So I think that emphasis has to be very much there. Emphasis on language. I'm so happy you brought the Nari Shakti versus Nari Mukti. And one of the reasons why I feel the right wing does so well in reaching out, because they sort of adopt words which people already believe in, say they reaffirm. We've always heard this, and now you package it here, But if you remember, Sushma Swaraj also meant publicly that this was during, I think, the 2004 defeat of the NDA, when this whole debate about a Western woman becoming prime minister came, and she said that she'll shave her head. She'll shave her hair because if they're, this is against the. So that, and it worked. What may appall you or somebody else worked. So I think the ability to capture where are we getting those ideas, and do we have our own resources in our own writings, books, poetry, to argue, even the epics, I mean, everything for that matter, for an alternative critique, because otherwise that alienation is absolutely complete, So this is just some ideas that I had, and thank you very much again for inviting me to IMPRI, and thank you, Pushpesh and Professor Patel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri, for bringing out the contradictions in which we all live, and the contradictions faced by women's movement and the uneasy relationship of women's movement with the state, because at the right from 1976 with the Equal Remuneration Act, continuously we have asked for legal reforms. When we started providing support to women survivor of violence, we were called, all my leftist friends called me reformist, that's what you are taking up the issue of. And when you take up the issue of domestic violence or rape, you end up going to police, okay? And if you file the FIR, you go to the court. And we know at one level we are critiquing them for its misogyny, but at the same time, we also have to create the support structure. And we have also, as economists, we have also asked for the gender responsive budgeting for rehabilitation for rebuilding the life of rape survivors, because they get abandoned by their own families. So I think we live under this kind of and as you said, that gender norms, they start from family, and I think they are they are the ones which shape your personality. So I think starting very young, that's very important, because this kind of talks only with because most of the studies, even when I have spoken to hardcore criminals in the prison, they said that when I lifted skirt of a classmate in primary, when I was in preschool, everyone laughed at, even teacher laughed at. When in the primary school, when I just went and accident, just without informing, I hugged the girl. She started crying and whole class was laughing. In the college, when I started ragging girls and harassing them, people thought it is a great joke. I wish, ma'am, you would have talked to me earlier when I was a child, because I grew up hearing all dirty things in my life, all double X and triple X pornography, which valorizes sexual violence and sadomasochistic relationship, and the same thing, woman is a prey and man is a hunter, the same kind of, and I said, and I was performing, I know that nobody, there is no impunity for me. So I think the challenge is really very, very great for all of us who are in the field of education and also social activism. Now, I ask Dr. Devika to make her presentation, Dr. Sridevi to make her presentation, to respond to both.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Vibhuti.
Yes.
Thank you, Pushpesh, for a wonderful narrative of all the existing stories. If I clearly look into your narrative, it basically talks about the role of state, role of society, and role of the different agencies, and kind of the language and the culture we are actually in from all these agencies. I'll be basically focusing on two important aspects. That is, one, the vulnerable groups, how different it is, the sexual violence against the women coming from the vulnerable groups. And the second one, the kind of language and culture we promote at the household level or within the society. The third part is the sexual harassment at the workplace also. Because that is very, very important also to talk about it. And you actually brought out an important issue of the film industry, where we talk about shaming of the body and the color of the woman, how important they become while talking about the various aspects. So first, let me get into the aspects of the vulnerable groups. Although you have mentioned various examples of the women coming from the Dalit communities and then various other vulnerable groups, how they face the sexual harassment. The rise in the atrocities, if we look into on Dalits, reflects the failure of the state in the discharge of its constitutional responsibility. The APTI takes many forms, including the tactics of not registering the FIR and very slow process of investigation process, the delays in the legal process. All these weaken the position of the vulnerable in seeking the justice. And the evils manifested in the justice seeking the process are the extension of the basically social characteristics. So that way, caste is a powerful and dominant form of the social and economic discrimination. Intervening of the caste hierarchy with the powerful in politics is one form. So the layers are deep in the form of the very strong social networks, translating into solidarity in various strata of governance and institutions, and does not invoke any kind of a trust in and fairness of the justice at any stage, putting the victim in further vulnerable and precarious condition. This kind of attitude coming from the society and state also pushes most of the vulnerable group women not to approach the state, either it may be police or the legally or the local bodies. So the inaction of the state maybe has given more assurance and more power to the crime and criminals, maybe the question mark there again, because if we look into the Hatra case against the Dalit woman in Uttar Pradesh in May 2014, Hatra case in Uttar Pradesh, and in May 2014, where 2 Dalit teenage girls were kidnapped, gang raped, and hanged from a tree in Bhadan. In that case, actually 5 men, including 2 policemen, were accused of the crime initially. But however, later CBI said that the girls had taken their own lives and had not been gang raped or murdered. But the same claim is rejected by their family as well as the Dalit community also. And why Dalit women or the marginalized woman remains to be under tremendous social pressure is, most importantly, they bear the burden of vulnerable caste as well as the gender identity. Hence, they hesitate to report the cases. And they were also subjected to social stigma of untouchability. As Ambedkar observed, untouchability was not only a system of social discrimination against Dalits, but also a system of uncontrolled and unmitigated economic exploitation. So in a way, they're not in a position to exercise their basic human rights despite constitutional safeguards under SC/ST Atrocities Act, because most of the time their human rights are denied. And when Dalits seek justice, assert rights, or questions the dominance, retaliation comes in various forms, including denial of rightful wages, social boycott, or in some cases, stoppage of the various minimum requirements, and at the end, it will end up with the sexual violence. So there is a strong association of the atrocities against Dalits with access to land, water, and education. We have the best examples of the Karam Chedu, as well as the Chundur incidents in Andhra Pradesh. But even with all that, whatever said legally, constitutionally provided rights, even today, people have a notion that the justice done, see, the sexual violence against the female, whether whatever community they belong to or religion belong to, is same. But when it is done to when a upper caste female member undergoes a sexual violence, the kind of response from especially from society is different from the society outlook towards the Dalit women also. Like you were mentioning the example of the 2019 brutal rape and murder of the veterinary doctor in Hyderabad. During the same time, there were also 2 rape cases. Deaths have taken place with reference to the Dalit women, but their cases were not, they did not get so much of support from the society, or they were not highlighted. There is some gap between how the society perceives the sexual harassment of a dominant group as well as the underprivileged section. One. The second aspect, when we are talking about the culture, actually our society has given us certain norms and prejudice. We actually follow those norms and the prejudice without questioning those prejudice. So even now, our grandparents or the parents tries to teach the same kind of the culture norms at the household level. So male members are always treated in a different way when compared to the female members of the household. So as Professor Roshni was mentioning, it's very, the culture is very, very important. How you groom your male member of the household and the female member of the household. When anything happens, most of the times the households are afraid, the parents are afraid even to support their own daughters. That's how if we look into the recent dowry death case of the Kerala, even dowry death cases of the Telangana, it is very clear that parents always tries to tell them that it's okay, in the sense the domestic violence, sexual violence is part of the married life or whatever it may be. They try to convince the girl, and ultimately leading to the dowry death cases. The second, the language, even the society, the way they treat the two heterogeneous women is different. As it was already mentioned by you, when a woman coming from the informal sector or the poor background, they are treated differently. The kind of language we use against them is different when compared to the high income group or the dominant caste group. Same is the case with, in terms of appearance also. A female member who is the color of the skin also matters when we talk to them, or the way we respect them also. The other form of the sexual harassment is women trafficking, which is very dominant, pertinent issue now, especially with the teenage children. We see most of the tribal group children who belong to 15 to 19 years, and the Dalit community group children are actually trafficked in the name of saying that we'll be providing them as a domestic help work or something like that, and then sexual harassment takes place on them. Now the question is that the sexual violence against the woman is not only the ugly face of the crime against the woman in our society, it is deeply intertwined in the caste oppressions, hierarchy, where women become the target. Because if you look into the workplace sexual harassment cases, we have the classic cases of the Air India of 2012, and in 2012, Infosys case. So we have like that many cases where the hierarchy plays a very crucial role in sexual harassment, actually. So it is horrifying combination of the two evils manifesting in the form of the caste and gender, identity, issues relating to land, denial of rightful wages, denial of access to water, and an array of rights are rooted in many of these atrocities where women becomes the target. You may be aware, Pushpesh, that recently one lady, Mariamma, I think of late we don't hear most of the police lockup death cases. But Mariamma case has raised many questions.
Yeah.
Arrested, not FIR was not filed, but next day she's dead. That's how they treated her in the police station. Just that they received a complaint that there is a loss of the 2 lakh rupees, and nobody knows whether she has taken it or no. What is the actual issue? But it is horrifying to see a female lockup death even now. And most of the cases, women become a major target. So are these atrocities because of the lukewarm response from the governance, or is it the silent indifference and apathy from the immediate society? Are they really reflecting the real characteristic of our collective consciousness, or a reflection of unconcerned governance structure of an eroding democracy? Is need to be questioned, because even after having all kinds of laws, where do we fail? Why women do not get the justice? So I stop it here. I once again thank Arjun, and I thank Pushpesh for a very interesting narrative of all the information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vibhuti ma'am, please unmute. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sridevi, for highlighting the question of caste. And we know that right from the 70s, when all the investigation committees on the caste riots, I think I myself have been there when the Marathwada riots took place, and when we highlighted the question of mass rape of Dalit women, nobody was even ready to publish it. They were not even, because the Dalit bodies are available. Anybody can use them. So they face internal patriarchy and also the external patriarchy, which also eroticizes their body in one way, and at the same time their helplessness and powerlessness that is just taken for granted. And I think the same thing, we see the same logic extending even in the domestic workers case, because I live opposite an orphanage where all these middle class employers would bring this domestic worker who is pregnant, they would leave her at the gate of the orphanage, and when the delivery takes place, the same people would come and take her back. And this girl, she would not, even the counselor, when they talk to her, they don't speak about it, because it's an unwritten law that anybody can use and abuse their body. So I think this is a very important dimension that you have brought in, and the double standards of the society vis-a-vis the so-called good woman, upper caste woman, and also the women who are Shudras and Atishudras. And right from the colonial times, we have seen the narratives of those who are powerful. How do they see it? Whether it's, and also in the literature, Mahashweta Devi's Dopri also brings out it so succinctly. Now we go to Q&A session. Ishika has asked 3 important questions that can be taken up. We also have here Dr. Vaida Nainar, who has been in the jury of all the sexual crimes world over, whether it was in Kampuchea or in Bosnia or in Rwanda, and she has even Gujarat riots and all. So we will request her also if she can also intervene and share. She just submitted a PhD thesis on the same subject and got her PhD degree just 10 days back. So first Ishika, and then if Dr. Vaida Nainar wants to speak. Yeah. Ishika, should I read or you will speak your question? You have written 3 questions in the chat box.
She's trying to connect.
Okay.
For the timing, you can read, or we can skip.
Yeah,
and
I can.
I will check with her.
Yeah. So Ishika's first question is that, thank you, sir, for such an insightful talk. My question is that, as we all know, bodies of women are political and personal is political, quote unquote. So how do you see the relationship between religion and gender, wherein all responsibility of carrying out the tradition is on women's, this thing, right, whether it's a Karwa Chauth or all the cultural functions that happen. Nikah halala is still prevalent. How do you how do we solve these intersectionality issues? Her second question is that how do we make our medical system sensitive to needs of LGBTQ plus people as they continue to be excluded from hospitals based on their sexual identity? Supreme Court recently said that LGBTQ plus marriages are against the social fabric of India. How do we stop this systematic exclusion? And her third question is that rape laws in India presume that only women are being raped. And what about LGBTQ plus people? And corrective rape exists, but there is no law about the same.
Yeah, the first question is about religion and gender. And I think it's a very difficult and complex issue. And I personally do not have a very definite kind of an answer to this. Actually, religion cannot also be treated as very monolithic kind of a structure. In fact, if you look at Sabah Mahmood's writing, Politics of Piety, and she's talking about how within the religious discourse, how women, have a certain sense of agency at the same time. So there are contradictory practices within religion, and it is very hard that you should do away with the religion. Because, there's a recent survey which was done, and people live with religion. People die for religion. And so we have to create a space for negotiation within these practices. And we have to look at and how many groups and many people have appropriated religion. We have to look at those stories of appropriating religion and articulating it in a very democratic kind of a framework. For example, if you are talking about sexual minority and transgender community and all, there is a group in Ayodhya which is called Sakhi Sampradaya. Sakhi Sampradaya has lot of poems, and there is a whole genre of poetry through which they sort of highlight, and I mean, they are playful. So these are men, and they wear saris, they cross dress and all, and they worship Rama. So how do they worship? This is part of religion, but what do they say? They say that, we are the Sakhis of Sita, and they're teasing Rama. And they're saying that you are just picking up the petticoat of Sita or something. A lot of eroticism is at play within the religion itself, So we have to see, but when the nationalist politics was going on in the canon making of nationalism, what was happening with these kinds of elements? Even Mira's poetry and whatever, where you have a lot of erotic elements are just being erased and sanitized. So whatever desanitization we have within these traditions and the democratic possibilities, we have to sort of revive, we have to sort of bring them to the forefront. And this is one of the ways of confronting, the oppressive aspects of religion, which oppresses religion. So if we say that we just, it's very easy for some women, who are independent, empowered, and belong to certain class to become atheist and say that, no, I don't believe in religion. But, most of the people's life is trapped within religiosity. And how do we, if you really go by cross-cultural studies and all that, there are a lot of possibilities even within the religion and religiosity. For example, even the spirit possession, what women are doing, they get possessed by the spirit and ask 4 kg of meat, I want. What do you want? I want meat. I want this. So if women are not getting food, because the husbands and children and other in a joint family, they eat up all the non-vegetarian food, and she's only left with some gravy or something. So what she does, she would get possessed by certain spirit, and then people will ask what you want. So she negotiates her life in a very oppressive kind of a structure, appropriating certain. So there are a lot of dramas in social life, And how do we understand, engage with that, and address religion? And I don't have any definite answer to that. And of course, the oppressive aspect of it has to be contested. But there is no way in which South Asian society is going to do away with religion and religious practices, etc., except a tiny minority of women, maybe.
Part of community life.
Yeah.
State
And
is not
this
separate.
is one of the possible answers. Please look at Sabah Mahmood's writing, Politics of Fighting. The second question is about, I just forgot.
Second question is about the role of second one is that how do we make our medical system sensitive to the needs of LGBTQ plus people as they continue to be excluded from hospitals based their sexual identity? And the Supreme Court recently said that LGBTQ plus marriages are against the social fabric of India. How do we stop this systematic exclusion?
There are a lot of questions within one question. Yeah, so hospitals, and definitely there has to be a trans-friendly, queer-friendly hospital, particularly for trans women and trans men. There are different kinds of needs, gender affirmative needs. They need therapy, they need hormones. The intersex people needs a different kind of health system, and the whole system is completely blind. And the only way out is through a very strong social movement. And trans women and trans men and trans communities particularly are offering a real resistance to the states, since 2014. And they have compelled the state, as Professor Chaudhuri is saying about possibilities, they have compelled the state to go for certain reforms in their act. And the state came up with the transgender rules. And within the rules, you will find they have considered many of the demands of the transgender community.
At the same time, for rape of a transgender person, punishment is only 2 years. While
So there is a difference. So that's why I said that state is transphobic. That for the same kind of offense, if a transgender woman is raped, if there is for cis women, it is 7 years. For trans women, it is 2 years. So what kind of imagination the state has that if a trans woman is raped, it is of not a serious variety. So give the offender less, and most of the time, even in the case of cis women, it is only 2% that they are penalized or punished, So most of the accused are just made free, So what I'm saying is that the state is definitely, it is only through the movements of the communities and in forging, and I have written about it within Hyderabad, you will see that trans women, transgenders have forged alliance with Dalit movement, Dalit feminism, and many other marginalized groups, in our campus, Hyderabad University campus, where Rohit Vemula suicide, So every Shahadat day, a lot of trans men, trans women are coming to the campuses to pay their homage to Rohit Vemula. And Rohit Vemula was talking about within the campus, why can't we have a trans women's beauty contest or something, So there is certain give and take, and a Dalit, scholar from Osmania University, he composed a poetry that hijras are the diamonds of humanity, translated into English. It's a poem in Telugu language. So these movements are the only hopes to a state which is transphobic, to a state which is, and as Professor Chaudhuri is saying, there is a continuity between the state and society. Pratiksha Bakshi is saying, what kind of people, for example, the people who are part of Khap Panchayat, they become Sarpanch. And these Sarpanch become MLA. This MLA then goes to Parliament. So there is a continuity from, society to state and all that. And that's why, I talk about Justice Verma Committee report where they have talked about police reforms and sensibilizing the police forces, sensibilizing the state, sensibilizing the judiciary, etc. And that is needed to break somewhere these kind of imaginations where transphobia and all is naturalized. in the modus operandi of the state and society and
Now, I
state and
think
society.
because of this consistent effort, new advisory, which is
Yeah.
given by the Supreme Court, that no judges would use certain things, no, the gender
Yeah.
stereotypes and the misogynist
Yeah.
language
True, true,
for
true.
women
So,
and
so
trans
now what has happened, many of the private parties like NGO, civil society and all are coming up. In Hyderabad, they are instituting a hospital which is exclusively meant for transgender, sex reassignment, surgery, therapies, etc., etc.
In
They're
Baroda, they have
experimenting
come
with
up
it.
with the shelter home
Yeah.
in Vadodara.
Yeah, yeah. So
Shelter
in
home.
this, for example, you will see there is a gender neutral hostel. In our university campuses, there is a demand for gender neutral washroom and gender neutral hostel. I'm part of the committee. And now the university is willing to talk about it, willing
PISS
to
was the first
institute
one.
and Center for
PISS
Women's.
already has. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the things, you know, the demands and consistent, persistent mobilizations around certain things bear certain fruit, and it changes the public culture and imaginations and thinking,
right.
which is a slow process. But of course, hospital as a space is definitely required. Marriage, I have written a paper which is in the process of being published. You know, the same-sex marriages, for example. The same-sex marriage is a very controversial issue. Only, you know, and there is a school of thought which says that only the people, the gay men particularly, and women, gay men and women who are from very privileged kind of background, they are asking for marriage rights. And if you look at the queer theory, basically the queer theory is very, very disruptive against norms. So marriage is a norm, right? Marriage is based on certain roles, certain understanding. And what has happened to gay men who are very privileged in America? And there's a book by Lisa Dugan, you know, you must read. She talks about homonormativity, how these men have turned homonormative. So what they're doing, they are middle class, gay men, very privileged. And what they do, they have shifted from the queer area where trans communities and other poor working class queer men will also live with the communities and families, to a very privileged area because they will adopt children and they want a better school. So there is a stratification of schools in the US context, for example. So where the better schools is there, these married gay men will move there and they can buy away things. Whereas black,
ostentatious marriages.
yeah, so the black queer men or women, they're forced to live with their communities. They don't have independent resources. And they don't talk about marriage out of fear of backlash, everything. And they're living in shanty towns. So from where it is coming. So in India also, who are demanding? You look at this this person, what is her name? Who is behind this 377? I forgot her name. Menka Guruswamy and her partner. They're extremely privileged, Oxford educated or Cambridge educated, and they're invited for a lecture. And they are talking in the Oxford and Cambridge about India. And they're saying marriage is very central to India. Right? The whole feminist critique they're erasing from their discourses and debate.
And they're exoticizing, no? Because
Yeah.
they don't have to pay the price.
Marriage is a problematic issue for queer people. And the queer is about disrupting the norms. And many people can't afford the luxury of marriage. So they are saying that you make alternative relationship as legitimate. Many trans women are into living in relationship and they don't want to marry. Right? And they want legitimize. So there should be joint account for people who are living in relations. Why to marry? Why marriage becomes a passport and entry to everything and a kind of legitimacy. So marriage demand is also coming from very right-wing kind of gay men in America. So marriage is a very, very problematic thing. There are a lot of writings.
Right. Ishika has one last question. Ishika?
Yeah.
Be quick.
Same about the marriage only, LGBTQIA. Our last question was that. Yeah.
One more question on the ways and institution.
Yeah, I think. So,
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful session. So, sir, my question is related to Internal Complaints Committee. That after Vishakha guidelines, it was made mandatory for every institution to have the body of ICC. But, sir, how do you think, like, are these institutions accessible? Because in my view, I think there are many laws, there are many institutions to like access justice, but I don't think that they are that effective. So what do you think about that? And my second question is that, so when we talk about rape laws in India, so sir, like it presumes that only women are being raped in India. I think LGBTQ plus people are also being raped, and I think it's called corrected rape. But there is no law in Indian constitution about that, and nobody talks about that also. Sir, so sir, what do you think about that?
And Ishika also has internal complaints committee in LSR.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So, the first nomenclature you just see, earlier it was GSCAS. Gender sensitization was, prefixed. So gender sensitization is just erased. What is there? Now you have internal complaint committee. It is toned down, It is less politicized by the universities. The universities and the kind of things are happening inside the internal complaint committee. I come to know hear this because they are confidential stories. So I can't share. But if you can hear these stories, what kind of counseling is given to these women who bring complaints to the internal complaint committee? And also, if you look at GSCAS, the kind of resources which are allocated to GSCAS, and now you see neoliberalism, and the kind of resources which is made available to internal complaint committee. I'm part of something called gender champion, So the nomenclature you see, gender champion in the campus. So I'm a coordinator of School of Social Sciences of Gender Champion. We don't have any money, any fund.
Gender champion was also evolved by our feminist friends who wrote the Saksham report and gave recommendation to UGC after Nirbhaya tragedy.
But she must have
feminists were in the committee, no? And
yeah, talked about some resource allocation. So even if you want to invite somebody and give a token honorary, you don't have. So you are responsibilized. The university administration, the state is not responsibilized. So this I read as a very neoliberal kind of stance. Whereas the whole radicalism, the whole empowerment agenda, earlier what happened, when the self-help groups were started in India, I have studied in phenomena in Maharashtra. So when it was under the state patronage, Maharashtra government's patronage, the gender sensitization was a component of that. And then these women are coming together, sharing their stories of oppression, torture, harassment by the husband. And then if a woman is beaten up by the husband, all women will go and say, now if you beat, we all will beat you.
Collective action.
So there was a collective thing. Now it is taken over by private banks. The banks are interventionists. The state role has gone. So what the banks are doing, they're just giving loans to these women. These women have become this is a very instrumentalist approach. And then these women are not able to repay. They're sending gundas, police, some kind of violence is institution. And this is the story of neoliberalism. So I look at internal complaint committee within the context of this neoliberal agenda, where you do not talk much. You do not have resources. You do not invite people who are controversial. So no money for that. Yeah. So, so internal complaint committee is just a kind of toned down and kind of a tokenism, in my understanding.
Yeah. Professor Maitrayee, Chaudhuri, would you like to say something? Yeah.
I think this is an absolutely wonderful session. I really don't have anything more to say.
Yeah.
So,
my experience of setting up Women's Development Cell of Bombay University, and that too with a progressive Vice Chancellor, Dr. Mungekar, was there. But I think it is so power focused. When it comes to people in the lower bottom of the hierarchy, action is taken. But when the complaints are against management and principal and this, you are constantly under pressure. And they said, Madam, do you know the meaning of soft paddling? No, soft paddle. And that is the kind of, and finally, it is only the women's group when they start agitating and have organized their protest action, then some action is taken. So I think that explains why young women had to go for Me Too movement, no? The collective solidarity side, standing by each other, using social media, naming and shaming, they had to do because the internal complaints committee did not deliver. Yeah. Okay. So now, any other question, or I would just sum up, and after that, all three of you.
Simi, if you have any question, please be brief.
Yes, very short question. Thank you so much, Professor. My question is, how would you theorize and also reconcile the the violence, the sexual violence against sex workers.
Yeah.
And do you see a nexus between the judiciary and the lawmaking, the legislature? Because on the one hand, if judiciary has to say that it is the lawmaking institutions that need to come and amend the laws, if at all, and there is no action, rather there is inaction from the other side, then what remains is just status quo. So how would you reconcile this, sir? Thank you.
Okay, the sex workers question, and Professor Patel and Professor Chaudhuri both have been talking about this whole division between good women and bad women, So on the one hand, sex workers are very forcefully articulating that they are women in their own right, they are workers in their own right. But who will change this language? The state is unwilling to change this language and recognizing these women as labor force, right? And the society. And this Darbar Mahila Samanvay Committee, which is a very strong in Kolkata, Sonagachi, from where it is coming, is a very strong, powerful movement. And it has provided a model to international sex workers movement, in fact. And they are talking about sex work as work, and they have instituted a very democratic model inside Sonagachi, and no sex worker can be exploited. But what the state is doing, you look at this anti-trafficking bill, where what they're doing, the women who are also voluntarily doing sex work, they are caught by the police, picked up by the police, put into rehabilitation homes. That's a very draconian thing. In Hyderabad, what was happening? One sex worker went to the court and she was squeezing her breast and milk is coming out and so saying that my child needs this and I'm forcibly put into the rehabilitation home. And the 2-month-old baby was needing that milk. So what kind of violence the state agencies and this whole entrenchment of the bad women, so nobody is coming, to protect. So I see sexual violence, which is coming, there is a continuity between the society and the state, as far as the sex workers, women. I think if Maya is here, Maya Sharma, who is the author of Being Lesbian in Underprivileged India, I think she promised me to be here. She can handle this question in a better way. And there is a parallel workshop going on anti-trafficking bill 2021. Yeah, so I think these are the people, Bisakha Datta, Meena Sheshu. These are the people I think they are they will most competently handle this question than me. But this is what my understanding goes. So state is very, very, what happened when the demonetization was happening in India. So in that context, a honorable minister from this government, he raised the point. So because of this demonetization, people do not money to go to the sex workers. Look at this minister's statement, right? These sex workers earn money and they feed their family and children. And Darbar Mahila Samanvay Committee is saying, who are the people coming to us? From the same middle class family, people are coming to us. And in Kolkata, the lower middle class women are also going to Sonagachi, doing sex works and coming back home, bringing money to their families. So there is a continuity between, the sex work and the non-sex work mainstream world. And they are saying, bring out these stories and destabilize these models of sex work is completely different, segregated domain. There is an interaction, there is a continuity, etc. So we as scholars have to align with sex. I am going to the certain meetings of the sex workers because of this pandemic. I have stopped sort of because I'm very frightened now. Otherwise, I used to attend these meetings. So we who are into gender studies or not, or whatever scholar, we have to align with sex workers movement and we have to raise these voices to strengthen their movements. And I don't think their movement is weak either, right? So during the pandemic, when sex workers were not allowed to, there was a study from some American or I think British university, Harvard University. And these people said that because of sex work, these infection will increase. Then these sex workers gathered, they had several meetings, and then they were telling, I have 24 years of experience of doing sex work. So we know how to do sex work without getting infected. They're most enlightened, and they were contesting this Harvard study. And I think they have to withdraw it from online spaces, I think, this study, right? So there is contestation, very strong contestation now
But
coming.
there was
And we
tremendous.
have to nurture it as allies, as partners, as something. That is the only answer. Otherwise, state and society.
Yeah, because now the so-called body distancing and this thing, that is also bringing another type of stigma against all the working.
And they were all dying, you know, they did not have any money. And the state was not doing anything. Thanks to some NGO, some help is coming.
Yeah, and even those who are ready to provide ration kit, like my daughter is doing relief work for past 15 months. They said, we want a photograph and Aadhaar card of each and everyone, no? And some of the very prestigious funders, they were saying that, and they said, nothing doing, we are not going to, we don't want your money, we don't want your ration kit, that kind of. So total insensitivity of even those who are,
the trans women sex workers, for example, they were asking for 2,000 rupee per month or 3,000 rupee per month from the state. Nothing more, just to survive.
Correct.
And that was also not forthcoming. Some ration cards, some this card, some that card, many trans women don't have.
Yeah. On the contrary, police did nakabandi, no? Human rights lawyers had to rush because they were being brutalized in the midst of lockdown, and newspapers were also not even giving any coverage. What was happening at the ground.
But it was only Telangana and AP states who are provided without any ration card. I think 20.
Later on, Sridevi, not in the beginning.
But that after filing the
March, but
litigation.
I think from April onwards, they provided without any asking for any Aadhaar card or ration card.
No, but that,
later on.
That also because of the public interest litigation filed by Swasthya Parishad
but
Sarojini from Sama and all, they've been inducted in the 21-member committee by the National Human Rights Commission, no?
That's how, as Professor Chaudhuri said, that possibilities, you know.
Pressure is very important. Pressure from below is very important. So I think we had a very, very enlightening and very important discussion today. So I think I would like to sum up by saying that when we talk about sexual violence, I think the other side of the coin is women's resistance. And I think it is very important that person like Dr. Pushpesh Kumar is speaking on this issue, because we feminists and we women's rights activists have been talking for past 40 years about women's rights and human rights, but it took nearly great effort, more than 3 decades, even to make the international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International to acknowledge sexual violence as a human rights issues. And finally, in 1993, when the women's organizations from more than 170 countries got together in a Vienna Congress, that we accepted that women's rights are human rights, and 15 days of activism against sexual violence and violence against women, 1 million rising campaign, which is also aided by social media, has now reached the totally unreached areas also. So the notion of human rights, which is founded on the core values of freedom, equality, equity, and justice, and I think it insists on equality of treatment to all and no discrimination against anyone, whether it's whether a person is a poor or from a certain caste or religious minority. None of them can be violated. That is the message which the women's movement and human rights movement has given. And human rights are a basic guarantees of entitlements and freedoms that every human being must enjoy in order to be able to live life of dignity and pursue opportunities to realize one's full potential. And I think LGBTQIA community, the way they are facing day-to-day systematic and structural violence, we need to fight against that. And because that issues also get eroticized, no, because it's so much linked to the sexuality. So human rights includes the right to live free from fear and want, to be treated as an equal and not to be discriminated against, to be protected from cruel, inhuman, degraded treatment, to have equal opportunities for the pursuit of livelihood, to be free to own and dispose of property, to be good in health and receive care and treatment when ill, and to receive education, to receive shelter, express one's thoughts and opinion freely, to pursue religion of one's choice, and most importantly, to have access to justice and effective remedy when one or more of the entitlements are violated. So I think we need to strengthen this kind of a thinking and action, both in theory and praxis, that all persons, no matter who they are, what they do, or where they come from, they must enjoy the rights, human rights, bodily dignity, bodily integrity, irrespective of citizenship, nationality, race, ethnicity, language, gender, caste, class, religion, political opinion, and abilities. So human rights are not a privilege that may be granted to a chosen few or on a discretionary gift or reward. They are means and measure that when fulfilled, will ensure human needs are met, human potential realized, and opportunity is equally available to all, benefit equally, equitably, or the fruits of the development, and the weakest are included and protected. And the central notion of equity permits special groups like women, children, minorities, sexual minorities, religious minorities, and Dalits and ethnic minorities, that those who have traditionally suffered disadvantage and they are vulnerable and be specifically protected, and affirmative actions are required to ensure that they get equal status, equal opportunity, and right to live in dignity. Now, I request all three speakers. I think Professor Pushpesh Kumar has spoken, but other two discussants, Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri and Madam Sridevi, to make their summing up statements, as well as what can be done by us as citizens. And
I think this was an absolutely wonderful discussion. Various kinds of issues cropped up. I think we all have our hobby horses, and I've been sort of very obsessed with the education, that there is something which I feel that a lot of our problems are because of our inability to realize many of our gains which were got by various progressive groups to become part of our curricula, not just the stated curricula, but also the hidden curricula, to develop abilities by which we can connect. So those issues which are constituted within our family, which become part of our common sense, which we take for granted, can be questioned. So perhaps, this is something we can think about doing across what Pushpesh was saying, that, when you are actually going to the groups of the trans people, or the communities which are marginalized, or sex workers, to learn from them, and, because I think there was somewhere that, a lesson to be learned in the contemporary times. How do we communicate and bring about a more just society, because there are levels. So you can have fight for human rights at the legal level, judicial level, international institutional level. But how do you say it's a good thing when people actually believe it's not a good thing? That is, I think, one of the main challenges which we face today. So thank you.
Very good. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Sridevi, please. Hello.
Yeah. For me, the two most important aspects is the access to education. There is a need for having the equal access to education to all the female members, and also making them aware of their human rights as well as the legal rights. The third aspect is the role of the state. State plays a very crucial role in reducing the various forms of the harassment. It may be sexual, domestic, or even in reducing the dowry death cases. Like the kind of the awareness now Andhra Pradesh government is trying to do through I think it is called Disha app, or they have established the Disha police stations where women have a direct access for the company. And maybe when such kind of the programs takes place at the state level, we can also see some kind of a change or influence on the society also at local level also. So it is basically, I feel that the foremost important is the access to the education, providing them equal opportunities, and the functioning of the at workplace, basically the functioning of the sexual harassment cell or the internal complaint cell, and the gender sensitization. I strongly believe that any organization should have the caste and the gender sensitization, uh, kind of the classes or whatever it may be initially, whoever takes up the employment, because the language tone matters a lot, either it is students or faculty or your own colleagues, how we treat them, what kind of respect we are. Many times it so happens that invisibly we are always discriminated, but we don't even realize that. I think that awareness is very, very important. That all comes through education. That's what I believe it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Sridevi.
Sri.
Yeah, I think we all of us have had a very, very exhaustively, we have examined the problem. We all know that we believe in collective struggle, we believe in collective wisdom, and whatever understanding, whether Dr. Pushpesh Kumar or Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri, Dr. Sridevi and myself have arrived at is mainly because of the collective catharsis we all have had over the last 4 decades of fight against sexual violence. But at the same time, we also need an icon. And the best icon, according to me, is Maya Angelou, who was herself a survivor of a child sexual abuse. She had lost her speech. It was a teacher whose counseling and supportive support that she provided. She gained the new confidence and she emerged as a global icon. And I would like to end today's very, very educative and insightful and sensitive discussion on sexual violence with her verses, where she says that you may write me down in history with your bitter and twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Do you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? Cause I laugh like I have got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness. But still, like air, I rise. Out of the huts of history of shame, history shame, I rise up from the past that's rooted in pain. I rise, I am a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that is wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am dream and hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. So formally, to give a vote of thanks, Anshula will proceed. Anshula, over to you.
I think that would be wonderful note to end on. So on behalf of the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, I would like to formally thank all of you for joining us for this very pertinent and thought-provoking discussion on sexual violence, perspectivizing the role of the child. We are grateful to our speaker, Professor Pushpesh Kumar, for taking up the time to be with us and delivering a very engaging and insightful talk. Thank you, sir. We are grateful to Professor Vibhuti Patel for chairing the session and for adding depth to the discussion with her insights. We are also grateful to our discussants, Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri and Dr. Sridevi, for taking up the time to join us at the end of the conversation. thank all participants who joined us here on Zoom or in the Facebook Live, or our leader and all listening to the podcast. We hope that you will continue to tune in for our future episode of Chapter Chapter. Thank you all still,
and thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Arjun, for bringing us together.
Yeah, I know, after such a
Patel,
long.
Dr.
Yeah.
Professor Chaudhuri,
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Sridevi.
Arjun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very, very
So good.
excellent
Quite
delivery.
talented. And that too in such a depressing time when you meet people, we all are sailing in the same boat as for
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Have a nice evening. I will share the videos and materials.
We have been using your lectures for our students.
Okay.
EPG Pathshala lecture.
Oh, thank you.
Women's movement, social reform movement. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.